Hello, and welcome to our podcast episode number 57, A Family's Fight for Survival During a Night of Legalized Crime. I am Thomas, and as always, here with me, my friend Timothy. Tonight, we are going to talk about The Purge. As always, spoilers ahead. The Purge is a 2013 American dystopian action horror film, written and directed by James DeMonaco, about a wealthy family who find themselves in danger during the annual Purge, a night where all crime, including murder, is temporarily legal. Well, Tim, did you enjoy The Purge?
Well, Tom, I have to say I found it to be quite passable. It was certainly entertaining enough as a horror film. However, as someone who enjoys action films, I felt that the action scenes were lacking in terms of intensity and originality. The premise itself is intriguing. The idea of a night where all crime becomes legal has some potential for social commentary and thrilling situations. But unfortunately, I think the movie falls short in delivering on both fronts.
Well, I have to admit I'm not really a fan of horror films. But even so, I found The Purge to be quite engaging. It managed to keep my attention throughout the entire film, which is something that doesn't happen often with me and horror movies. As for the action scenes, I thought they were done well enough. They served their purpose in creating tension and suspense during the story. The social commentary aspect was also interesting. It made you think about how people might behave if given complete freedom to commit crimes without consequence.
Yes, Tom, I can see where you're coming from with that. However, I can't help but feel that the film relies too heavily on shock value and gore to carry its message across. It almost seems like it's trying to be both a horror movie and a thought-provoking social commentary at the same time, which doesn't always work out well, in my opinion. Don't you think the characters could have been developed further? I found it difficult to connect with any of them on an emotional level.
That's an interesting point you make about character development, Timothy. I have to admit that I didn't feel particularly connected to any of them either, but I think part of that might be intentional. The movie is more focused on the concept and the action than it is on exploring individual characters' arcs in depth. However, I do agree that some additional development could have helped make their struggles feel more personal and relatable. Now, moving on to discussing the plot of The Purge itself, one aspect I found particularly intriguing was how it played with our expectations about who the protagonists and antagonists are. Initially, we think that James Sandin and his family are the good guys because they're trying to protect themselves from the purgers who come knocking on their door. But as the story progresses, we see shades of gray in each character. Zoe's relationship with Henry, Charlie's decision to help the wounded man, and even Mary's eventual acceptance that they must defend themselves against their neighbors. The movie does an effective job of blurring these lines between right and wrong, which adds depth to what could have been a straightforward home invasion thriller. Another element I enjoyed about The Purge was its exploration of the psychology behind violence and revenge. We see characters like Grace Ferrin from the neighboring house who participate in the Purge not only because they enjoy it, but also as a means to an end. They're angry at James Sandin for their perceived mistreatment at his hands through his security system business. This kind of motivation adds complexity to what might otherwise be seen as mindless violence. Of course, I can see where you're coming from with your concerns about the movie relying too heavily on shock value and gore. There are definitely moments that feel gratuitous or unnecessarily graphic, but overall, I think it does a decent job of balancing these elements with more thoughtful themes and social commentary. What do you think, Timothy? Well, I can understand your point there, Tim. However, I feel like the film's focus wasn't necessarily on character development, but rather on creating a tense and gripping storyline. It was more about showing how these characters were forced to confront their darker sides in order to survive this night of anarchy. As for the plot itself, I thought it was quite engaging. The idea of a family trying to protect themselves from both external threats and internal conflicts within their own home during this period where all crime is legalized really added another layer of complexity to the story. It made you question how far they would go to protect each other and what lines they were willing to cross in order to survive.
Yes, I can see your point there, Tom. The plot was indeed engaging and managed to keep me on the edge of my seat for most of the film. However, as someone who enjoys action movies, I felt that the film could have benefited from more intense fight scenes or maybe even some strategic planning between characters. It seemed like they were constantly reacting rather than taking proactive steps to ensure their survival. Additionally, while I appreciated the social commentary aspect of the Purge, I felt like it could have been explored further. There was potential for some gripping discussions about morality and justice. But these themes were only superficially touched upon, in my opinion.
Well, Tim, while I agree that there is always room for improvement when it comes to action scenes or exploring social commentary themes further, I still found The Purge to be a satisfying film overall. It was able to blend elements of horror and action in a way that kept me entertained throughout its runtime. Furthermore, I felt like the characters' reactions to their situation were believable, given their circumstances. It wasn't just about them fighting off hordes of masked killers. There were also internal conflicts among family members, which added depth to the narrative.
Tom, I have to admit I was expecting more from the direction in this film as well. There were some tense moments, but overall it felt a bit underwhelming. The cinematography could have been better utilized to create a sense of claustrophobia or unease throughout the movie rather than just during certain scenes. Additionally, I felt like James DeMonaco could have done more to establish the world outside of the Sandin's gated community. We get some glimpses into the chaos through news reports and such, but it would have been interesting to see how other parts of society were coping with this annual event.
Oh, that's an interesting point you make about the direction and cinematography, Tim. I think James DeMonaco did a decent job overall, especially considering this was only his second feature film as director. However, there are definitely areas where he could have improved upon. For example, you're right that we don't get to see much of what's happening outside the Sandin's neighborhood, which does make it feel somewhat disconnected from reality at times. As for the cinematography itself, I felt like some shots were quite effective in creating tension and unease, like when they show close-ups of people's faces covered in blood or when there are quick cutaways to characters watching their surroundings through security cameras. But overall, you're right that more could have been done to elevate the film visually. Now moving on to discuss some aspects related directly to The Purge itself. Another aspect I found intriguing was how it plays with our expectations about who should be considered the good guys and who are the bad guys. Initially, we might think that James Sandin and his family are the protagonists because they're trying to defend themselves against these masked assailants. But as you mentioned earlier, Timothy, there are shades of gray in each character's actions. We see Zoe's relationship with Henry, Charlie's decision to help the wounded man, and even Mary's eventual acceptance that they must defend themselves against their neighbors. This blurring of lines between protagonists and antagonists adds depth to what could have been a straightforward home invasion thriller. Finally, I wanted to touch upon one aspect that I felt was particularly well executed in The Purge, its use of social commentary through symbolism and metaphor. For example, the idea of the American flag being used as a prop during some characters Killing serves as an effective metaphor for how twisted national pride can become when violence is glorified like it is during the Purge. Similarly, the use of masks worn by the Purgers symbolizes both anonymity and mob mentality. How people can lose themselves in a crowd and commit atrocities they wouldn't normally do without any consequences or repercussions. I found these subtle touches to be quite powerful and intriguing overall. What do you think, Timothy? Well, while there are certainly areas where The Purge could have been improved upon from a storytelling perspective, I still think it's an engaging film that manages to balance horror, action, and social commentary fairly well for the most part. It raises some interesting questions about morality, justice, and human nature, which is why I believe it has remained so popular among audiences despite its flaws.
Well, Tom, I have to admit you make some compelling points there. It's true that the film does attempt to explore some interesting themes and ideas through its storytelling. Now, moving on from the directorial aspects of The Purge, let's discuss the performances of the actors in this film. Personally, I thought Ethan Hawke did an admirable job as James Sandin. He manages to portray both the character's initial reluctance to resort violence and his eventual transformation into a ruthless survivor quite effectively. Additionally, Lena Headey brings depth and complexity to her role as Mary Sandin. Her character goes through a significant arc from being initially supportive of the Purge to realizing its true horrors and fighting against them. This transition is handled well by Headey, who conveys both vulnerability and strength in equal measure throughout the film.
Yes, I completely agree with you there, Timothy. Ethan Hawke and Lena Headey both did an outstanding job bringing their characters to life in The Purge. Speaking of which, I think one aspect that really elevated their performances was the excellent casting choices made for the rest of the Sandin family members as well. Adelaide Kane and Max Burkholder both played their roles convincingly, adding an extra layer of realism to the story. Their interactions with each other felt genuine, which helped make the audience care more about what happened to them during this ordeal. Furthermore, I thought it was interesting how each character had a different perspective on the Purge and its implications for society. This added depth to their relationships within the family dynamic as well.
Well, said Tom, it's true that casting played an important role in making these characters feel realistic and relatable. Now, let's discuss some of the other actors who portrayed the Purge participants. I thought that the performance by Riz Wakefield as the leader of the gang was quite chilling. His cold detachment and calculated mannerisms added an extra layer of menace to his character. Additionally, I felt that Zachary Knighton did a decent job playing Henry, Zoe's boyfriend, who turns out to be part of the resistance against the Purge. While his character wasn't given much depth or screen time compared to some others, he managed to make an impression nonetheless.
Yes, I agree with you there, Tim. Riz Wakefield did indeed do a fantastic job portraying the eerie calmness, yet terrifying intentions of his character. It was quite unsettling how he could switch between being seemingly polite and empathetic one moment to displaying pure rage and violence the next. As for Zachary Knighton, you're right in pointing out that Henry didn't have much development either. However, I felt like Knighton brought enough intensity to his performance during their confrontation scenes with James Sandin. Overall, I believe the entire cast did an excellent job bringing the Purge's twisted world and characters to life on screen.
Now, Thomas, let's shift our focus towards discussing the cultural significance of The Purge. I think it is worth exploring how this film reflects on contemporary societal issues and values. One aspect that stands out to me is the way it plays with ideas about freedom, liberty, and personal responsibility. On one hand, we have characters like James Sandin, who initially support the Purge because they believe it provides an opportunity for people to express their anger and frustration without consequences. On the other hand, we have characters like Zoe, who begin to question the morality of this system when she witnesses its darker side firsthand. This duality raises interesting questions about whether unrestricted freedom can ever truly exist without corruption, or if there needs to be some form of regulation in place for the greater good. Furthermore, I think The Purge serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of dehumanization and mob mentality. The masks worn by the purgers are symbolic representations of this concept. They allow individuals to lose touch with their humanity and engage in acts of violence without any remorse or empathy. This theme is further explored through characters like Henry, who becomes consumed by his desire for revenge against those he perceives as being responsible for the collapse of society, ultimately leading him down a dark path from which he cannot return.
Yes, Timothy, you make some excellent points there. The Purge does indeed touch upon several important cultural themes and issues that are still relevant today. One aspect I found particularly interesting was how the film portrayed the idea of social class and wealth disparity. We see characters like James Sandin, who are part of the privileged class, initially supporting the Purge because it benefits them economically, yet they eventually become targets due to their wealth. This mirrors some real-world situations where people in power or those with significant resources can sometimes be seen as oppressive or exploitative by those less fortunate. Additionally, we also see characters like Zoe's boyfriend, Henry, who represent the underprivileged segments of society and are willing to fight against this unjust system, even if it means resorting to violence themselves. Furthermore, I think The Purge serves as a commentary on our fascination with violence and its role in popular culture. We see characters like those living in Zoe's neighborhood who treat The Purge like some sort of twisted entertainment event rather than recognizing its true horrors. This obsession with spectacle is not unlike what we see today, where people often consume violent media without fully grasping its consequences or implications. Finally, I believe that one of the most significant aspects of The Purge is how it explores themes related to family dynamics and loyalty during times of crisis. We witness characters like James Sandin, who initially prioritize their own survival, but eventually come around to protecting their loved ones at all costs. Similarly, we see Zoe's relationship with her parents evolve over the course of the film as they learn to rely on each other for support and protection during this terrifying ordeal. This emphasis on familial bonds in the face of adversity resonates strongly with audiences worldwide, making The Purge a timeless tale that continues to inspire discussions about society, morality, and human nature even today.
Well said, Tom. I couldn't agree more. In conclusion, The Purge is an intriguing film that delves into some important cultural issues while also providing an entertaining horror thriller experience. It successfully blends social commentary with suspenseful storytelling and features strong performances from its cast members. The themes explored in this movie are still relevant today, making it a must-watch for anyone interested in exploring the complexities of human nature and society's darker sides.
Absolutely, Timothy. I found The Purge to be a very powerful film that left quite an impact on me after watching it. It raises important questions about freedom, morality, class disparity, and our fascination with violence, while also offering some interesting insights into human psychology during times of crisis. As you mentioned earlier, the performances were top-notch and really helped bring these complex characters to life on screen. In terms of our final thoughts on The Purge, I would have to say that I thoroughly enjoyed it despite my initial reservations, about its premise being too far-fetched or unrealistic. However, after watching the film, I found myself questioning some aspects of modern society and wondering if certain elements portrayed in this movie could potentially become a reality if things were to take a turn for the worse. It's certainly not an uplifting or comforting thought, but it does serve as a reminder that we should be vigilant about preserving our values and working towards creating a better world for ourselves and future generations. So there you have it, folks. Another amazing film discussion brought to you by Timothy and Thomas. We hope you enjoyed listening in on our lively debate as much as we enjoyed having it. As always, we encourage you to comment below with your thoughts on The Purge or any other topics we've discussed previously. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button if you haven't already. Until next time, take care and happy viewing.